A quiet ranch, a loyal cook, and bruises that tell a story no one dares to speak aloud. But when one man decides to act, the West will never be the same. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from, and why you're following this. The rising sun painted the Montana sky with hues of amber and gold as Thomas Whitaker stepped onto the porch of his ranch house. At 45, his face was weathered by years of harsh winters and scorching summers, but his eyes remained sharp, surveying the vast expanse of land that had been in his family for 3 generations. The Double W Ranch was his pride and joy, though these days it felt emptier than ever. "Mornin', Mr. Whitaker," called Sarah Collins, his cook of 6 months, as she hurried across the yard from the small cabin where she lived. "Breakfast will be ready in 20 minutes. Thomas nodded, noticing how she walked with a slight limp today. "Everything all right, Sarah?" "Just fine, sir," she replied quickly, averting her gaze as she climbed the steps. The sleeve of her dress rode up slightly, revealing a dark purple bruise encircling her wrist. "What happened there?" Thomas asked, gesturing toward the mark. Sarah tugged her sleeve down hastily. "Nothing to worry about, Mr. Whitaker. Just clumsy is all." She disappeared into the house before he could press further. Thomas frowned, scratching his beard thoughtfully. Sarah had come to work for him after his wife Clara passed away from pneumonia 2 winters ago. She was an excellent cook and housekeeper, quiet but efficient. Recently, though, he'd noticed a change in her jumpier, more withdrawn, and now these bruises. Inside, the smell of coffee and frying bacon filled the kitchen. Thomas watched as Sarah moved about, her movements precise despite her obvious discomfort. When she reached for a plate on a high shelf, her dress shifted again, revealing more bruises along her upper arm. "Sarah," Thomas said firmly, "those bruises didn't come from being clumsy." She froze, her back to him. "It's nothing for you to concern yourself with, Mr. Whitaker." "I'd say it is, seeing as you're under my employ and living on my property." Sarah's shoulders slumped slightly. It's my husband, James." She turned, revealing a fresh bruise blooming beneath her left eye that she'd tried to hide with her hair. "He comes by sometimes when he's been drinking." Thomas felt his jaw tighten. He'd met James Collins a few times, a surly man who worked at the sawmill in town. "I wasn't aware he was visiting you here." "He comes at night, mostly. Says I belong at home with him, not working for some widower." Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. "But we need the money, and he gambles most of his away." Thomas stood, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. "This stops now, Sarah. No man has the right to treat his wife that way." "Please, Mr. Whitaker," Sarah pleaded, genuine fear in her eyes. "If he finds out I told you, it'll only make things worse." "He won't be touching you again," Thomas stated, his voice calm but resolute. "Not on my land, not anywhere." As Thomas ate his breakfast in silence, his mind raced with possibilities. The law in these parts was often slow and ineffective when it came to domestic matters. Sheriff Parker in town was a good man, but even he would likely just give James a stern talking to before releasing him. By midday, Thomas had formulated a plan. He rode into town, first stopping at Harrington's General Store to speak with its proprietor, William Harrington, an old friend. "That Collins fellow," Thomas asked casually, "what do you know of him?" William's expression darkened. "Mean drunk. Gets his pay on Friday and loses most of it at McGregor's saloon by Saturday. His poor wife ... double quotes," he trailed off, shaking his head. "That's what I thought," Thomas nodded grimly. "I'm going to need a few things." After gathering supplies, Thomas made his way to the sawmill. James Collins was easy to spot, a wiry man with cold eyes and permanent sneer. Thomas observed him from a distance, noting the way the other workers kept their distance. Later that evening, as the sun began its descent behind the mountains, Thomas waited in the shadows near Sarah's cabin. Sure enough, just after dusk, the sound of approaching hoofbeats broke the evening silence. James Collins dismounted sloppily, clearly already in his cups. Thomas stepped forward, his tall frame blocking the path to the cabin door. "Evening, Collins." James squinted through the dimming light. "Whitaker, what the hell do you want?" "I want you to get back on that horse and ride away, for good." James laughed, an ugly sound. "That's my wife in there, my property." "You got no right. No woman is property," Thomas cut him off. "And on my land, I decide who stays and who goes." Collins' face contorted with rage. "You been sniffing around my wife, Whitaker? That it? Old widower getting lonely?" Thomas remained perfectly still, his voice steady. "I'm giving you one chance to leave peacefully, or what?" James sneered, drawing closer. The smell of whiskey wafted from him. "You gonna shoot me? For disciplining my own wife?" "No," Thomas replied. "But I will ensure you never harm her again." What happened next was swift and decisive. James lunged forward, but Thomas was ready. Years of ranch work had made him stronger than his lean frame suggested. He sidestepped Collins' wild swing and delivered a solid blow to the younger man's midsection, followed by another to his jaw that sent him sprawling in the dirt. "Get up," Thomas said coldly. "Unless you've had enough." James staggered to his feet, spitting blood. "I'll kill you for this, Whitaker." He charged again, this time managing to land a glancing blow before Thomas countered with a series of punches that left Collins gasping on his knees. "You're done here," Thomas declared, standing over him. "And you're done hurting Sarah." The cabin door creaked open, and Sarah peered out, her eyes wide with fear and disbelief at the scene before her. "Mr. Whitaker, please," she began. "It's all right, Sarah," Thomas assured her, not taking his eyes off James. "Your husband was just leaving. And he won't be coming back." James glared up at him, hatred burning in his eyes. "This ain't over." "Yes," Thomas replied firmly. It is. The following morning brought a heavy silence to the W ranch. Sarah prepared breakfast without meeting Thomas's eyes, her movements stiff and uncertain. The bruises on her arms seemed darker in the morning light, streaming through the kitchen windows. "He'll come back, you know," she finally said, placing a plate of eggs and bacon before him. "James doesn't forget, and he doesn't forgive." Thomas looked up from his coffee. "I've spoken with Sheriff Parker in town. He's aware of the situation." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she wiped them on her apron. "A sheriff's badge hasn't stopped him before, Mr. Whitaker." "Then we'll find another way," Thomas replied, his voice gentle but firm. "You don't have to live in fear, Sarah." She turned away, blinking back tears. "That's easy for you to say. You don't know what he's capable of." "I've seen enough men like your husband to have a fair idea," Thomas said, memories of his time fighting in the war between the states briefly darkening his expression. "But you have my word, you'll be safe here." Later that morning, Thomas's foreman, Miguel Vasquez, rode in with news from town. "There's talk all over, patron," he reported, dismounting from his horse. "Collins is at the saloon, telling anyone who'll listen how he's going to burn this ranch to the ground." Thomas nodded grimly. "I expected as much. Double the night watch, Miguel. And make sure the men are armed." "Si, patron," Miguel replied. "What about Mrs. Collins?" "I've asked her to move into the main house for now, the east bedroom." Thomas caught Miguel's questioning look. "It's for her protection, nothing more." Miguel nodded respectfully. "Of course. The men and we think what you're doing is right. A man who beats his wife ... He spat on the ground. "No, he's un hombre. Not a real man." As dusk approached, Thomas found Sarah on the porch, staring anxiously toward the road that led to town. Her few belongings had been moved to the room he'd prepared, but she seemed reluctant to fully accept the arrangement. "You shouldn't have to change your life because of me," she said quietly as he joined her. "This trouble I've brought to your doorstep ... You didn't bring anything," Thomas countered. "James made his choices. And I made mine." Sarah turned to him, studying his face. "Why are you doing this, Mr. Whitaker? Most employers would have simply sent me away rather than risk their business and reputation." Thomas was silent for a moment, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue sky. "My father taught me that a man's worth isn't measured by his wealth or his land, but by how he treats those who depend on him." He paused. "And perhaps I understand something of what it means to feel trapped. Before Sarah could respond, the distant sound of galloping hooves drew their attention. A cloud of dust was visible on the road, approaching fast. "Get inside," Thomas ordered, reaching for the rifle he'd leaned against the porch railing. "Lock the door behind you." Sarah hesitated only briefly before hurrying into the house. Thomas positioned himself on the porch, rifle ready but not raised. As the riders drew closer, he recognized Sheriff Parker leading a small group of men. "Evening, Thomas," the sheriff called as they reined in their horses. "Heard there might be trouble out your way." "Nothing I can't handle, Daniel," Thomas replied, lowering his rifle slightly but not setting it aside. Sheriff Parker dismounted, his weathered face grave. "James Collins has been making threats all over town, serious ones. I've got him locked up for now on drunk and disorderly, but I can only hold him for a day or two. I appreciate the warning." The sheriff stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Look, Thomas, I understand what you're trying to do here, and God knows that Collins' woman deserves better than the hand she's been dealt, but you need to tread carefully. Collins has friends, the wrong kind of friends." "I'm not afraid of James Collins or his friends," Thomas stated firmly. "Maybe you should be," the sheriff countered. "Word is he's reached out to the Blackwood brothers." Thomas felt a chill run through him at the mention of the notorious outlaws. The Blackwood brothers had terrorized 3 counties with their robberies and violence. If James had indeed secured their help, the threat had just become significantly more dangerous. "All the more reason for Sarah to stay here, where we can protect her," Thomas insisted. Sheriff Parker sighed, adjusting his hat. "I've telegraphed the federal marshal in Helena. He's been wanting to bring in the Blackwoods for some time, but it could be days before he arrives." After the sheriff and his men departed, Thomas found Sarah in the kitchen, her face pale with worry. "You heard?" he asked. She nodded. "The BLACKWODS. Mr. Whitaker. James rode with them years ago, before we were married. That's how I met him when they passed through my hometown." Her voice trembled. "If they're coming, you need to let me go. I'll leave tonight, head west. Maybe California." "Running won't solve anything," Thomas said firmly. "They'd only track you down. And then you'd be alone, with no one to stand beside you. Why would you risk everything, your ranch, your life, for someone you barely know?" Sarah asked, tears welling in her eyes. Thomas moved closer, carefully taking her hand in his, a gesture of reassurance, not presumption. "Because there was a time when I couldn't protect someone I cared about, and I've regretted it every day since." He took a deep breath. "My wife Clara wasn't only taken by pneumonia. She was weakened by years of my failure to see what was happening." "I don't understand," Sarah whispered. "Clara's father was a powerful man in these parts. He never approved of me, never thought I was good enough for his daughter. Even after we married, he controlled her, isolated her, made her doubt herself." Thomas's voice grew rough with emotion. "I was too focused on building this ranch to see how she was suffering. By the time I realized, her spirit was already broken. The pneumonia merely finished what her father's cruelty had begun." Sarah's expression softened with understanding. "You couldn't have known." "I should have," Thomas insisted. "So when I saw those bruises on your arms, I made a promise to myself, and to Clara's memory, that I wouldn't fail another woman the same way." For the first time since he'd known her, Sarah Collins smiled, a small, fragile thing, but genuine. "Thank you," she said simply. As night fell completely, Thomas organized the ranch hands into watches. The main house was fortified, windows boarded, extra ammunition distributed. If the Blackwoods came, the Double W would be ready. In the quiet hours before dawn, as Thomas made his rounds checking on the men at their posts, he found himself outside the door to Sarah's room. A soft light still glowed beneath the door. He hesitated, then knocked gently. "Sarah, are you all right?" The door opened slightly, revealing Sarah in her nightgown and robe, her hair loose around her shoulders. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted. "Every sound makes me think they've come." "Try to rest," Thomas advised. "We have men watching in all directions. Nothing will happen tonight." She nodded, but fear still shadowed her eyes. Mr. Whitaker, Thomas, if something happens to you because of me, nothing's going to happen, he assured her. But whatever comes, we'll face it together. As he turned to continue his rounds, Sarah reached out suddenly, catching his hand. I never thanked you properly for being the first person to really see me in a very long time. Their eyes met in the dim light of the hallway, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Then Sarah slowly withdrew her hand and closed the door, leaving Thomas standing alone with his thoughts and the weight of what was to come. 2 days passed in tense vigilance. The ranch continued its operations. Cattle needed tending regardless of human conflicts, but every man carried a weapon, and nobody ventured far alone. Thomas received word from town that James Collins had been released from jail, but there had been no sign of him or the Blackwood brothers. Perhaps they were just rumors, Miguel suggested as he and Thomas mended a fence line on the western edge of the property. Talk to frighten us. Thomas drove a fence post into the ground with methodical force. Maybe, but we won't let our guard down yet. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made both men reach for their rifles, but it was only Billy, one of the younger ranch hands, riding hard from the direction of town. Mr. Whitaker, he called, reining his horse to a dusty stop. Sheriff Parker sent me. The Blackwoods were spotted crossing Miller's Creek this morning, heading this way. 4 of them, including James Collins. Thomas exchanged a grim look with Miguel. How long? Sheriff thinks they'll be here by nightfall. He's gathering men, but most are out with the cattle drive to Billings. We have 15 men here, Miguel calculated. All good shots. Thomas nodded. Billy, ride back and tell the sheriff we appreciate the warning, but he should focus on protecting the town. We'll handle our own. As Billy galloped away, Miguel looked questioningly at Thomas. The sheriff's men could help, patron. And risk more lives? No, Miguel. This is our fight. Thomas shouldered his rifle. Let's get back to the house. We need to prepare. The afternoon sun beat down as the men of W Ranch transformed the property into a defensive position. Wagons were positioned as barricades, horses moved to the back pasture, ammunition distributed. Sarah worked alongside them, filling canteens and preparing food that could be eaten quickly. You should hide in the root cellar, Thomas told her as they worked. It's the safest place if shooting starts. Sarah shook her head firmly. I'm done hiding from James. If he wants to bring this fight to your home, the least I can do is stand with you. Thomas wanted to argue but recognized the resolve in her eyes, the same determination he'd seen growing in her over the past days as she began to reclaim her strength. Instead, he handed her a small revolver. Do you know how to use this? My father taught me before I married James, she replied, checking the chambers with practiced ease. He thought every woman should know how to protect herself. Wise man, Thomas remarked, impressed. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in fiery hues, the ranch fell into an eerie silence. Men took their positions, speaking in hushed tones if at all. Thomas stood on the porch, watching the road, Sarah beside him. It's not too late, she said quietly. You could still turn me over to them. Say I'm not worth the trouble. Thomas didn't take his eyes from the horizon. Is that what you want? No, she admitted. For the first time in years, I feel worth fighting for. A small smile touched Thomas's weathered face. Then that's all that matters. The attack, when it came, was not from the road as expected, but from the eastern ridge. Gunfire erupted suddenly, bullets splintering wood and shattering windows. Thomas pulled Sarah down behind the porch railing as the ranch hands returned fire. They're trying to draw us out, Miguel shouted from his position near the barn. 4 riders circling around back. Thomas turned to Sarah. Get inside, stay low. Then to his men. Miguel, take Johnson and Peters and circle behind them. The rest of you, hold your positions. The gunfight intensified as dusk deepened into night. Muzzle flashes illuminated the darkness like lightning strikes. One of the ranch hands cried out as a bullet found its mark, and Thomas heard the distinctive laugh of Elias Blackwood, the eldest and most vicious of the brothers. Come on out, Whitaker. A voice bellowed James Collins. "Send my wife out, and maybe we'll let you live." "She's not yours anymore, Collins," Thomas shouted back, firing toward the voice. "She never was." A bullet whizzed past Thomas's ear, embedding itself in the doorframe behind him. He ducked, then rolled to a better position behind a water barrel. From there, he had a clearer view of the eastern slope. Shadowy figures moved among the rocks. He counted at least 5 men, more than they'd anticipated. Inside the house, Sarah had taken position at a window, her revolver ready. When one of the attackers made a dash toward the porch, she fired without hesitation. The man stumbled, clutching his leg, before crawling back to cover. "That's my girl." James's voice carried clearly through the night. "Always did have spirit. That's why breaking you was so satisfying." Sarah's hands trembled at his words, but her voice was steady when she called back. "You never broke me, James, and you never will." A new volley of gunfire answered her defiance. Thomas signaled to the men positioned around the house to hold their fire, conserving ammunition. The attackers would have to advance eventually if they wanted to take the house. The standoff continued for what felt like hours. Occasionally, one side or the other would fire, more to maintain pressure than with any real hope of hitting a target in the darkness. Thomas made his way carefully from position to position, checking on his men, redistributing ammunition. When he returned to the house, he found Sarah bandaging a flesh wound on young Jackson's arm. "How bad is it?" Thomas asked. "He'll live," Sarah replied, tying off the bandage. "But we're running low on medical supplies." Jackson looked up at Thomas, his young face determined despite the pain. "I can still shoot, sir. Rest for now," Thomas instructed. "We'll need every man before this is over." A sudden crash from the back of the house drew their attention. Thomas and Sarah rushed to the kitchen to find the window shattered and a flaming torch lying on the floor. Sarah quickly stamped out the flames while Thomas scanned the darkness outside. "They're trying to burn us out," he realized grimly. More flaming projectiles followed, some hitting the roof, others the sides of the house. The men scrambled to extinguish them, but it was clear the attackers had changed tactics. "We can't stay in here," Thomas decided. "Miguel, get everyone to the stone barn. It won't burn as easily." Under cover of their own suppressing fire, the defenders made a dash for the barna, sturdy structure built of stone and heavy timber that housed equipment and winter feed. Thomas made sure Sarah was safely inside before turning to assess their situation. 3 of his men were wounded, though none fatally. Ammunition was running low. And now flames were beginning to spread across the main house's wooden roof. "They think they have us cornered," Thomas told the gathered men. "But they don't know this ranch like we do. There's a drainage tunnel that runs beneath the eastern pasture, comes out near the creek. 2 men could circle behind them, take them by surprise." "I'll go," Miguel volunteered immediately. "And me," said Jackson, standing despite his wounded arm. Thomas shook his head. "You're hurt, Jackson. I'll go with Miguel." The young ranch hand began to protest, but Sarah stepped forward. "No, I should go." Every man in the barn turned to look at her in surprise. "Absolutely not," Thomas stated firmly. "James is here because of me," Sarah insisted. "And I know how he thinks, how he moves. I can get close enough." "It's too dangerous," Thomas argued. Sarah's eyes flashed with determination. "No more dangerous than staying here waiting to be burned out or shot." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Trust me, Thomas. I'm not that frightened woman anymore." Thomas studied her face in the dim light of the barn lantern. The bruises were fading, but the strength behind her eyes had only grown stronger. Slowly, he nodded. "Miguel, show her the tunnel entrance. Both of you take extra ammunition." He turned to the remaining men. "The rest of us will create a diversion, make them think we're attempting to break out toward the creek." As Miguel and Sarah prepared to leave, Thomas pulled her aside. "Be careful. If anything happens." Sarah reached up, touching his cheek gently. "I'll come back. We both will." The touch lingered for just a moment before she turned away, following Miguel to the hidden tunnel entrance beneath a false floor in the back of the barn. Thomas watched them disappear into the darkness, a strange mixture of fear and pride tightening his chest. Outside, the night had come alive with flames as the main house burned, casting an otherworldly glow across the ranch yard. Thomas organized his remaining men into positions around the barn, ready to begin their diversion. "On my signal," he instructed, checking his rifle one last time. "Remember, we're not trying to win this fight right now. Just keep their attention on us." The men nodded grimly, determination etched on their faces. They had fought alongside Thomas Whitaker for years, trusted his judgment, respected his integrity. And now they were prepared to risk their lives not just for him, but for the principle he stood for, that no person should live in fear, that some things were worth fighting for. Thomas took a deep breath, looking toward the eastern ridge where Miguel and Sarah would soon emerge. "Now!" he shouted, and the night erupted once more with the sound of gunfire and the shouts of men facing their destiny together. The diversionary tactic worked better than Thomas had hoped. As his men fired and moved between positions, calling out to each other to create the impression of a larger force attempting to break toward the creek, the attackers shifted their focus entirely to the barn. Meanwhile, Sarah and Miguel navigated the narrow drainage tunnel, crawling through decades of accumulated mud and debris. The passage, built by Thomas's father to prevent flooding during spring thaws, was barely wide enough for a person to pass through. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and rotting vegetation. "Almost there," Miguel whispered as they approached a faint glimmer of moonlight ahead. "The exit is behind a cluster of boulders. We should come out about 50 yards behind their position." Sarah nodded, trying to steady her breathing. The revolver felt heavy at her hip, a constant reminder of what she might have to do. Not for the first time, she wondered if she could actually pull the trigger if faced with James, not in the heat of battle as she had earlier, but deliberately, looking into the eyes of the man she had once loved. They emerged from the tunnel into the cool night air, crouching low among the rocks. From their position, they could see the backs of the attackers, 5 men spread out along the ridge, firing down at the barn. James was easy to spot, his tall frame silhouetted against the glow of the burning house. "There," Sarah whispered, pointing to a figure slightly apart from the others, a man with a distinctive wide-brimmed hat. "That's Elias Blackwood. He's the one giving the orders, not James," Miguel nodded. "If we take him out first, the others might scatter." They worked their way carefully up the ridge, using the rocks and sparse vegetation for cover. The gunfire from below provided perfect cover for any small sounds they might make. When they were within 20 yards, Miguel signaled for them to split up. He would circle around to approach from the right, while Sarah continued straight ahead. Sarah's heart pounded as she crept forward, staying low to the ground. Her dress was torn and muddied from the tunnel, but she moved with surprising stealth, her body remembering skills from a childhood spent in Montana wilderness before her ill-fated marriage. She was close enough now to hear James's voice, slurred with alcohol and rage. "Burn them out," he was shouting. "I want Whitaker alive. He needs to watch while I teach my wife her place." Elias Blackwood's response was chilling in its casual cruelty. "You'll get your wife back, Collins. What's left of her, anyway? My boys haven't seen a woman in months." Sarah froze, a cold fury replacing her fear. In that moment, any lingering doubt about what she needed to do vanished. She raised her revolver, aiming carefully at Elias Blackwood's back, when suddenly a twig snapped beneath her foot. James whirled around, his eyes widening in shock as he recognized her. "Sarah?" She didn't hesitate. As James reached for his gun, Sarah fired. The bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around but not dropping him. Chaos erupted as the other men realized they were under attack from behind. Miguel opened fire from his position, hitting one of the Blackwood brothers in the leg. The wounded man screamed, tumbling down the slope. Elias and the remaining 2 men returned fire, forcing Sarah to duck behind a boulder. "Sarah!" James's voice was a mixture of rage and disbelief. "You ungrateful whore! After everything I did for you, you did nothing but hurt me." Sarah called back, checking how many bullets remained in her revolver, 4. It ends tonight, James. Below at the barn, Thomas heard the new gunfire from the ridge and immediately understood. They've made it. Everyone, push forward now. The ranch hands surged from the barn, firing as they advanced. Caught between two forces, the attackers on the ridge found themselves in a desperate position. One of the Blackwood brothers broke cover, attempting to reach the horses they'd left tethered in a nearby grove. Miguel's shot dropped him before he'd taken 10 steps. On the ridge, Sarah was pinned down by James's continuous fire. He was wounded but fueled by rage and whiskey, advancing on her position with reckless determination. "Come out, Sarah," he shouted. "You think Whitaker wants you? You think anyone would want damaged goods like you? You're nothing without me." Each word struck at old wounds, but instead of causing pain, they only strengthened her resolve. Sarah waited until James paused to reload, then rose from behind the boulder, her revolver steady. "I am not nothing," she said clearly. "I never was." She fired twice. The first shot missed, but the second caught James in the chest. He staggered backward, a look of stunned disbelief on his face, before collapsing to the ground. Elias Blackwood, seeing the tide turning decisively against them, made a desperate break for escape. As he crested the ridge, Thomas appeared before him, rifle raised. "It's over, Blackwood," Thomas stated firmly. Elias sneered, his hand hovering near his holster. "This territory's changing, Whitaker. Men like you, clinging to your precious code of honor, you're dying out." "Maybe so," Thomas acknowledged, "but not tonight." In the split second that followed, both men reached for their weapons. Thomas was faster. A single shot echoed across the ridge, and Elias Blackwood fell, never to terrorize the territory again. As dawn broke over the smoldering remains of the main house, Sheriff Parker and his men finally arrived. The surviving Blackwood brother was taken into custody, along with their wounded accomplice. James Collins's body was loaded onto a wagon for transport back to town. Thomas found Sarah sitting on a fallen log near the barn, staring at the ruins of the house. Her face was smudged with dirt and gunpowder, her dress torn, but she sat straight-backed and calm. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, sitting beside her. "I killed my husband," she replied, her voice steady. "I thought I would feel something, guilt, remorse, but all I feel is relief." She looked at Thomas. "What does that make me?" "Human," he answered simply. "A survivor." They sat in silence for a moment, watching as the ranch hands began clearing debris and tending to the wounded. The immediate danger had passed, but the consequences of the night's events would reverberate for a long time to come. "What will happen now?" Sarah finally asked. "To me, I mean." "The law. Sheriff Parker has already taken statements from everyone present," Thomas interrupted gently. "It's clear what happened here was self-defense. No judge in the territory would rule otherwise." "And the ranch?" Thomas surveyed the damage with a practical eye. "We'll rebuild. The house is gone, but the foundation is still good. The barn survived, and we didn't lose any livestock." He paused. "The question is, will you stay?" Sarah turned to face him fully. "Do you want me to?" "Yes," Thomas replied without hesitation. "Not as my cook, though. This ranch needs a woman's touch again, a partner who isn't afraid to stand her ground when it matters." A small smile touched Sarah's lips. "Are you proposing, Mr. Whitaker?" "Not yet," he answered honestly. "We both need time. You to heal, me to be sure I'm worthy. But I am asking you to stay, to help rebuild, to see where this road might lead us." Sarah looked out over the ranch, the charred timbers, the bullet-riddled barn, the weary but resolute men already beginning the work of restoration. In this place of destruction, she saw something else, possibility. A future neither defined by James's cruelty nor constrained by society's expectations of what a widow should be. "I'll stay," she decided, reaching out to take Thomas's weathered hand in hers. "This feels like home now, a home worth fighting for." As the morning sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the land, Thomas and Sarah sat together in companionable silence. There would be challenges ahead rebuilding the ranch, confronting the whispers and judgments that would inevitably follow their unconventional situation, learning to trust in possibilities neither had dared imagine before. But for now, it was enough to have survived the night, to have stood against cruelty and emerged victorious, to have discovered strength in unexpected places. Sheriff Parker approached them, hat in hand. "Thomas, Mrs. Collins, we're about ready to head back to town. Is there anything else you need?" Thomas looked at Sarah, who shook her head slightly. "No, Daniel," Thomas replied. "We have everything we need right here." The sheriff nodded, his eyes moving between them with understanding. "Word of this will spread, you know. What happened here? It'll change things." "Good," Sarah said firmly. "Some things need changing." As the sheriff and his men departed, Miguel came to report that the men had salvaged what they could from the house and were ready to begin construction on temporary shelters. "We'll start rebuilding proper once we've secured the herd and repaired the fences," he concluded. "The men are saying this ranch has good spirits now, a guardian angel who fights for what's right." Thomas smiled, watching as Sarah walked among the ranch hands, checking injuries, offering water and words of encouragement. In the space of one extraordinary night, she had transformed from a victim to a protector, from someone who endured life to someone who embraced it fully. "Not an angel, Miguel," Thomas corrected gently. "Just a woman who found her strength when it mattered most." And as Sarah turned to catch his gaze across the busy ranch yard, her smile reflecting a new confidence and purpose, Thomas knew with absolute certainty that whatever the future held, they would face it together, not as rescuer and rescued, but as equals, bound by respect, admiration, and the promise of something deeper that would grow in its own time.